Look what the lesson is. It's part 3. We're looking at Isaiah right at the bottom of, I don't know what page this is, page 3. It says Isaiah 7 to 23. So we finished last time on the prophecy of Isaiah 7, which is the prophecy regarding Emmanuel. There was going to be a son born to a virgin at the time of Isaiah, and when he got to an age, the Syrians would invade. And that actually did come to pass. That was not only a prophecy fulfilled at that time, but also a dual prophecy fulfilled at the time of Christ, because he was also born of a virgin in Matthew chapter 1. So let's read the narrative. It says the narrative from chapter 7 to 23 covers a period of God's ultimate prophesied plan to send Emmanuel. I said before, it means God with us. It's two words, Imanu and El. Imanu means with us, and El is God. With us, God. To save the nation from the oppression of foreign nations and restoration of their land. So we're talking about Israel, talking about the oppression, and from this time onwards, it would probably go south pretty quick. From the time of Isaiah's writing, every nation conquered Israel, right through all the generations. And they were patiently waiting for their Messiah to come. And that would be Jesus, who would come during the Roman Empire's reign. Over the page, it says Isaiah 7 to 12 is termed the book of Emmanuel. Don't get confused. There is no book of Emmanuel in the Bible. It's not an apocryphal book or anything. Those chapters are just called the book of Emmanuel because they talk about Emmanuel, God with us, the promised Messiah. All right, so don't get confused about the word book there. It's called this because a section of the scroll contains the promise of the Jewish Messiah. And it's mentioned in Isaiah 7, Isaiah 8:8, and Isaiah chapter 9 about Emmanuel. And those prophecies came to fulfillment in Matthew 1:23. All right, where Matthew writes and talks about exactly the same thing, quoting the book of Isaiah that Jesus was truly born of a virgin. And then the following chapters from 13 to 23 contain the oracles of predictions of the nations. And if you've read Isaiah before or have started to read it, you'll see that most of the book is about the judgment of the nations, oracles against Assyria, Egypt, and so on, and so on, and so on. So from 13 to 23, if you read even the headings, we might look at that, and you'll just see like a judgment upon all the nations. All right. And then in that insert there, we're going to look at that insert. It says the house of Jacob. Jacob was the son of Isaac, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and his name was changed to Israel. Anybody remember what Israel means? What is it? Something of God. You well said. 9 out of 10 for that, just there, because you got the L. So it's got to be something with God. So what's the Israel about? His name was changed, Jacob was changed to Israel when he was wrestling with the angel, wrestling with God. So after that, he said he's not going to let go of this angel until God blesses him. And he didn't. And eventually God did bless him, and he changed his name to Israel, which means to fight with God or to wrestle with God, anything around there. And as I said before, the Hebrew is a difficult language because it's only consonants and there's no grammar and no quotation marks or anything. So this could either mean to fight with God or for God to fight with you. So it can really go a couple of different ways. The two important words is fight and God. The way you put them together is up to a bit of translation. So I believe it's literal because he fought with God. So I believe it means to fight with God, in the real sense. But people have kind of changed it to say, well, that's not a cool thing to say. So we're going to just say God fights for you. Yay. All right. But either way, all right. Okay. And from him came the 12 tribes of Israel. So when the kingdom was divided between north and south, the southern tribes became called Judah. So on the left-hand side of that little block, it says Judah, the southern tribes, or the capital of Jerusalem. And only 2 tribes joined with the southern kingdom of Judah. Anyone want to take a guess of what those 2 tribes were? Judah and Benjamin. Cha-ching. If I had chocolates, I'd throw it to you guys now. I do have chocolates. I can actually give it as prizes. Or I can do like Solidan in the service on Sunday. Look under your chair. You get a car. You get a car. No, we're not going to get cars today. The 2 tribes of the southern kingdom was Judah and Benjamin. Judah because he was the leading tribe, so they named the kingdom after him. And Judah, although he wasn't the oldest of the sons, He was the one from which the royal line would flow. Okay, flow through Saul, and then on Saul through David, Solomon, and right through Jesus Christ. So that's why he's important, because Judah becomes the royal line of the tribes of Israel. Benjamin was the youngest of his sons. He was the brother of Joseph. Joseph, we all know about. I actually feel sorry for Benjamin, because he gets like nothing. No one ever talks about him. He lives in the shadow of Joseph his whole life. Joseph was one of the raincoat and the dreams and all of that. He went to Egypt, became prime minister. Benjamin, no one knows anything about him. It's interesting that Benjamin, anybody want to guess what his first name was when he was born? It was changed to Benjamin. His name when he was born was Benoni. Just like that town up the road. So Benjamin was named after a town in South Africa. Benoni means the son of my suffering, because he was born and Rachel died. But then they said no. Jacob said, no, he's not going to be called Benoni, he's going to be called Benjamin. All right. Tribe of Benjamin, yes. Well said. The Apostle Paul, he was a Benjamite. Okay, so we got two. So understand, the kingdom was united with Solomon. It was divided between two, north and south. We spoke about this already. The southern part was called Judah. Only two tribes reigned in that whole area, Judah and Benjamin. It was called Judah because Judah was the main tribe. All right, and this is where the royal line would flow. And the capital of the southern kingdom was Jerusalem. Okay, we're on the same page so far. All right, let's go to the northern kingdom. The northern kingdom is called Ephraim. You can see on your page here, Ephraim. You can write next to, or around Ephraim, write Israel. Israel. It was also called Israel. The reason why it's sometimes called Ephraim is because Ephraim became the leading tribe of the remaining 10. How many tribes were there? 12. 2 went to the bottom, the remaining 10 went to the top, northern kingdom. Okay? So you can write next to northern tribes, write there 10. I'm not going to name them, it's all the rest. All right? So they went, and Ephraim was the one that actually, while Solomon died, there was conflict between the north and south, and Israel was in conflict as a nation. And then what happened was the leader of the Ephraimites then revolted and attacked the southern kingdom, and he took the 10 tribes to the north, and he became the leading tribe of the northern part. That's why it's called Ephraim. But most of the time in literature and Google and even in the Bible, you'll hear of Israel. Okay, so the common name of the northern empire is called Israel. And the capital is Samaria. You've probably heard of Samaria, especially during the time of Christ. It was Galilee at the top where Jesus lived. That's where he lived, through Nazareth, Capernaum. That's where he done all his early work in his ministry. And then he always went down to Jerusalem, to Judah, where the temple was. So all those stories are there. And then now and again you hear Jesus want to go through Samaria. And this is the spot. All right. Samaria was the middle part between Galilee and Judah. And there was a city there called Samaria, which was the capital of the northern empire. All right, and then at the bottom it just says 12 tribes. He had 12 sons. From him came the 12 tribes. And what I want you to do, somewhere around that part, that bottom part that says 12 tribes, is just write this verse for me. Genesis 35. Genesis 35. Verses 23 to 26. And then I want you to open your Bibles and turn to those verses. I just want to show you something of interest regarding the 12 tribes and the 12 sons. So we turn into the book of Genesis. If you've got to Exodus, you've gone too far. If you have Revelation, you're way past Genesis. Genesis is the first book in the Bible. What's the Hebrew name for the book of Genesis? Anybody know? If you look at the Hebrew name, we call it Genesis. It comes from the Greek Genesia, which means origins. But that's not the original name of the book. The original name in Hebrew, even to this day, in the Torah, is Bereshit. Bereshit. You know what it means? In the beginning. Isn't that weird, eh? So the first book of the Bible is called Bereshit, and it means in the beginning. Why? Because the first 3 words in the Bible is in the beginning. Interesting, eh? And then when we started to put the Bible together, we changed the names a bit. All right, but we're going to read from Genesis 35, and all we're going to be reading is about the names of those tribes. Let me just see again, 35, 23, 26. All right, so heading is always important. So on the heading of chapter 35, it says Jacob returns to Bethel. Bethel means house of God. Bet is house and El is God. And then it says another heading I've got is the deaths of Rachel and Isaac. Rachel is the wife of Jacob, the hot one, and she passes on. And then we go to verses 20, around 23. It says Jacob had 12 sons. The sons of Leah was Reuben, the firstborn of Jacob, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Issachar, and Zebulun. Next week we're going to have a test. You've got to spell all of these names correct. So Leah was his first wife. Then Rachel, Joseph, and Benjamin. I told you that there were only two sons born of Rachel, Joseph, and then his brother, his younger brother, Benjamin. The sons of Rachel's maidservant was Dan and Naphtali. The sons of Leah's maidservant was Gad and Asher. So there's the 12 sons born to Jacob. And the reason there's a lot of women mentioned here is because he wanted to always marry Rachel. That was the love of his life. And her father tricked him into not marrying her and marrying the sister, Leah. And the Bible makes it pretty clear that Rachel was a smoking hot one and Leah was the not so hot one. All right? And he got like a kind of a raw deal there. But to honor his agreement, he did marry Leah, and then he also married Rachel. And then at that time, Leah was very fertile and she started to have babies, but Rachel was barren and she couldn't have any children. So Rachel said, okay, listen, I'm getting a bit jealous here, so I can take my maidservant, lie with her, and then have children. She done that. Then Leah got jealous and said, well, I'm going to get on this also. She said, Jacob, then take my maidservant and also lie with her. So he just went from 10 to 10 to 10 to 10, as the ladies commanded. And that's why there's 4 ladies mentioned, because he actually had intimate relations with 4 of the ladies, and all of these 12 children were born to them. All right. So that means they're half brothers. They are half brothers. Legally not. Legally, if Leah gave her maidservant, the children will become hers, legally, through the Jewish custom. So they were technically half brothers because they were born from different mothers, but legally they all belong to the mother. All right. Always. Father, that's it. Well said. Yeah. Father to son. I said that on the family tree. It's always father to son. Women, father to son. That didn't count in those days. Okay, so there we've got a bit of the history about the 12 sons, and that's important because the next verse I want you to write down and look at. So write down on your page Numbers 1. Numbers 1, 20 to 47. So write that down first. Numbers chapter 1, verses 20 to 47. And then in your Bibles, what I want you to do is for a second, just can you put a mark or something in Genesis, just for your own good, in Genesis 35, and then turn to Numbers. Numbers chapter 1, verses 20 to 47. We won't read them all. I just highlighted the bulk of the chapter. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Genesis, the origins, Exodus, the exodus of Israelites out of Egypt, Leviticus, the laws of the Levites, Numbers. Why is it called Numbers? Sorry? Yeah, I suppose. It was the census and the numbering of the Jews. Okay. So they would come out of Egypt, they would settle down in the desert, and then they would take a census of the people, hence Numbers. And the first chapter says that you get the different numbering of all the tribes. Okay, so what we want to do is not read everything, I'll just call out the verses, but starting by Numbers chapter 1, verse 20. And now we just spoke about the 12 sons. And now what I want to just show you is the 12 tribes differ a little bit from the original sons. So in verse 20 it says, from the descendants of Reuben, he's the oldest. Then go to verse 22, from the descendants of Simeon. 24, from the descendants of Gad. Verse 26, we're just reading that first part of the verse. From the descendants of Judah, he's the one we spoke about now. Southern part, the royal line will flow through him. Verse 28, from the descendants of Issachar. So far, so good. Then verse 30 says, from the descendants of Zebulun. And then this is where it changes. Verse 32, it says, from the sons of Joseph, from the descendants of Ephraim. And then in verse 34, from the descendants of Manasseh. Did you see that? So what happens is, they were 12 sons. Joseph was the second last born. And he had 2 sons, Manasseh and Ephraim. All right? And then when the tribes were formed, what God done was something different. He took Joseph out of the 12 and he added his 2 sons in. How many would that give you? It's still too many. He only wants 12. All right? So now he's got 13. So then God had to remove another tribe. Anybody want to guess what tribe that was? Levi. Levi. And let's read on from there. Okay, let's just carry on reading, and then I'll show you the important verse. So we see it says Joseph, and then it breaks up into 2 different tribes, Ephraim and Manasseh. Then 36, descendants of Benjamin, the youngest. The descendants of Dan in verse 38. In verse 40, the descendants of Asher. In verse 42, the descendants of Naphtali. And then go to verse 47. It says, the families of the tribe of Levi, however, were not counted along with the others. Do you see that? The Lord had said, Moses, you do not count the tribe of Levi and include them in the census of the other Israelites, because they became part of the Levitical priesthood. So from the 12 sons, you would expect the same names to continue, but it doesn't. The 12 tribes become different names. Only because of Joseph, he takes the name of Joseph out and he includes his 2 sons in. They become part of the 12 tribes. And that's why we see on the page that the northern kingdom is called Ephraim, named after his son. And then, as I said, there must only be 12. God's very particular about his numbers. So there's only 12, so then there's still too many. God then removed the Levites. And he said they're going to be not part of the 12. They're not going to get inheritance of the land. They're going to be part of the Levitical priesthood. Do you know why God chose the Levites? What is his reason for choosing them? It actually goes back to the sacrificial law. By law, by the Israel law, every firstborn male, man and animal, had to be given to God. That was the law. So we were out with the animal sacrifices. So if you had animals, your firstborn, male, goat, or almost said pig, sacrilege, goat or lamb or bull, you would sacrifice that to God. You take him to the temple, give him to the priest, you would sacrifice it yourself, you take the blood and offer it to God for the forgiveness of sins. But the same law applied also to your male children. So ideally what they should have done was take their firstborn male child, take him to the temple and let the priest sacrifice him. But God will not allow that because he never ever said that we must sacrifice people. So what God done, he said, the law says you must give me your son, but I'm not going to take him. So God said, and because of that, I'm going to take the whole tribe of Levi. That's where it comes from. That's why he took Levi. He said, you can't give me your sons because you can't sacrifice them, so I'm going to take something else. I'm going to take the whole tribe of Levi, and they're going to work in the temple and the tabernacle forever and ever and ever. So that's actually why he chose the Levites. It wasn't just randomly. He chose them because it was a substitute for the Israelites' own children. Isn't that weird? Not weird, it's actually just interesting. All right, so that's why he chose the Levites. And even when it came to the 12 tribes, he said they are not going to form part of the inheritance. They're not going to get the land because they are possessions of mine. They were God's chosen Levitical priesthood. All right, so there we got, as I said, I told you to just put a mark in each of them. So maybe during the week you can read those 2 again and you can just see the disparity, the difference between them. It's not a contradiction. It was plain like that. All right. Yes, here we go. That's a bit of the sons and the tribes. Very important because when you read the Bible, I want you to understand all of this. That's why I'm telling you this information, that you know. All right, when you see difference in names, even in the New Testament, when you see those names pop up, you now know, well, there's a difference. All right, it says the longest name in the Bible is Raymond Anthony Butler. Isaiah 8:3. refers to Uzziah's son with the longest name in the Bible, Mahar Shalal Hazbaz. Do you remember what that means? We spoke about that a few weeks ago. It means quick to plunder. You can write that next to it, quick to plunder. Um, the idea was, some scholars believe that the son born of a virgin in Isaiah chapter 7, born to the Emmanuel, the prophecy of Emmanuel, was actually this guy, the son of Isaiah. And basically, when he came of age, the Syrians would come and plunder the land. So the idea was that there could be reference to that. His name means quick to plunder, and that's what happened to this son. All right. Oh, to plunder and get away. And that's exactly what they've done also. Well said. Well said. Yes, thank you. And okay, so we can move on. There we go. All right, let's go to the bottom part. We're finishing up the millennial kingdom. On your pages, right at the bottom, it says, Isaiah warned Judah not to trust the Syrians who had invaded Syria and Ephraim. Ephraim, again, is the northern house of Israel. The Assyrians also invaded Palestine, southern part, but did not take Jerusalem. And then it says the Babylonian invasion resulted in the southern house of Judah falling and the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem. I think we've mentioned this before, but I'll tell you again. The Assyrians, if you look at your map even, it's not 100%, but if you look at the map, if you've got it there, on the right-hand side, you'll see at the top the green lands. Do you see the green lands? Or do you have black and white? The grey lands. That's Assyria, the top part. You see where the line goes? Above the line is Assyria. Yeah, it's modern-day Syria and northern Iraq. Okay, so what happened is the northern kingdom was conquered by the Syrians. And it's geographically and practically right, because they came from the north and they came down to the northern part of Israel. They conquered them, took those 10 tribes and exiled them into Assyria. They became known as the 10 lost tribes of Israel. So they got scattered, intermarried all over Syria, and they did try to conquer the southern part, as Isaiah actually predicts and foretells and tells as history. They did try to attack Jerusalem, but they didn't get it right. God made it so that they could not conquer Jerusalem. So they didn't. They didn't conquer the southern part, and they went back and just lived their life as normal. And then what happened, this happened about 700 BC. About 600 BC is where the Babylonians come in. And on your map, if you basically see that, what does it say, Baghdad? Iraq, Assyria. You see that part that says Iraq over there? Right at the bottom here. This is where Babylon, the city, was. Okay? So what happened about 600 BC, the Babylonians came from this section and they conquered the southern kingdom of Israel called Judah. And that is the story of Daniel and Ezekiel. When we see the Babylonians conquer and they take Daniel and his friends away and Ezekiel into captivity, into Babylon, that is when that takes place. And what I'd like to just add on to that, where it says, sorry, I'm going to see it again, it does say Iraq and Assyria. That's not technically correct. All right? Assyria is always this northern part. Babylon is always that southern part. So maybe on your page somewhere you can just clarify that. You can write or would put an arrow up like that and say Assyria. That will maybe be easier. So from here, just put an arrow and write the Assyria. And then from that bottom part where you see, put another arrow and say Babylon. Assyria and Babylon were never intermixed. They were always very, very separate kingdoms. All right. So I think it's maybe just an error on the map. It's not technically correct. Assyria and Iraq is not the same place. With that being said, though, if you're all still listening, the northern part of Assyria did include modern-day Syria and Iraq. Okay, if you look at the top there. But the bulk of the Babylonian kingdom at the time of Isaiah and Daniel was always at the bottom. It was really a small. Babylon sits a big hype in the Bible and history, but it's actually a very small kingdom. It only covered a little circle around that section there. It wasn't a big empire. Very strong, though. Very formidable, but not that big. All right, so that's what happened. 600 BC, they conquered, burnt the temple to the ground, burnt Jerusalem to the ground, took all the Jews, most, not all of them, some still stay behind, took most of the Jews living in Jerusalem and that southern part, and exiled them to Babylon. modern day Baghdad. All right. Even today, there are still the ruins of that city being found, and there's a beautiful museum there. One day I'd love to go and visit that place, yeah. And just while we're there, you can maybe see where that line ends. There's like rivers there, the Tigris and Euphrates. You've probably heard of that. Very big rivers in the Bible, from Genesis to Revelation. And these rivers flow from the mountains and they go down into the sea. So it will flow from the mountains of Ararat, which is at the top here. Ararat, ring a bell? Noah's Ark. There you go. And it flows all the way into the rivers, and those rivers flow all the way into what's called the Persian Gulf at the bottom here. You see a little bit of blue there. And that area, right kind of where I'm pointing, right at the end there, at the where all these rivers meet at the Persian Gulf, that is where scholars say was the Garden of Eden. Well done. Yeah. Because the Garden of Eden in Genesis mentions those two rivers. And it also mentions two others which are no longer available. They dried up, what is not in existence. But those three rivers actually flowed together and formed the head at the head of the Persian Gulf. And that's exactly what Genesis tells us. The garden was at the head where these rivers formed. So that's just interesting information. And I always, yeah, we don't have to, like, sometimes the Bible is really simple. We don't have to guess things no more. It says Noah's Ark landed on mountains of Ararat. We know where the mountains of Ararat are. All right, so we know where it is. The Garden of Eden, we know where it is. It's not in Australia, it's not in China, it's not in Ireland. And I've heard all those ones too. I've actually heard some stories that Noah's Ark is on Mars. So I don't know where you get that from. Come on, people. So I sometimes I'm flabbergasted at the ideas that Christians come up with. The Bible's not that complicated. It wasn't written to theologians and to scholars who have spent 15 years in seminary. It was written to man. And I'm sure if we read this, we'll probably get the answers by ourselves. And sometimes we do. Like this, Garden of Eden. The Bible kind of tells us where it is. But yet, Noah's Ark apparently is on Mars. So I don't know where that comes from. All right, then we're going to finish off the last part. It says, chapter 7 to 23. Focuses on the nations dominating God's people, including Assyria, Ethiopia, and Egypt. So let's quickly turn to Isaiah in closing. Isaiah, not there. It's, if you were at Psalms, you can just carry on paging. Assyria, Babylon. And then what we want to do is quickly turn to chapter 13, Isaiah chapter 13. And all I want to do is quickly just read my heading in the Bible, all the different chapters. So Isaiah chapter 13, we just read on the page that it says that it focuses on the nations dominating God's people. And then it says a prophecy, in 13 it says a prophecy against Babylon. And then if you turn to 14, somewhere in the middle it says a prophecy against Assyria. In chapter 15, it says a prophecy against Moab. Moab we spoke about in the service on Sunday. The dodgy daughters of Lot. Moab on the east side of the Jordan. 17 against Damascus. Chapter 18 is against Cush. Does anybody have another thing on chapter 18? Another heading. Mine says a prophecy against Cush. Ethiopian, you got? Sudan, yeah, well done, all right. Cush is the ancient name of Ethiopia or Sudan. I'm actually more in favor of Sudan. Ethiopia, yeah. And then you get 19 is a prophecy against Egypt, and so on, and so on, and so on. Okay, so we don't have to go through all of them, but basically all I'm just showing you is that bulk of those chapters is just prophecies of judgments against those nations. That's where Isaiah gets a biggie landradig for me, I'll be honest. Because he could have just said all of that in like one little paragraph. But he spends lengthy chapters going into all metaphorical language of judgments against these nations, which is brilliant and great, and I love Isaiah. But as I said, once you read the first few chapters, oh man, when you get up in the morning, you think, oh, do I have to read the next chapter? More judgment. All right, but as I said, it is very, very pertinent to our growth as Christians to know what Isaiah is about, to know about the judgments, all right? Even though sometimes it's hard to read. All right, so there we go. That's all I want to do was just look at the chapters. because we're not going to read all of Isaiah. So at least now you know that if you look at those chapters, you know what they represented. They're representing prophecies against and judgments against those nations who conquered God's people, Israel. Right, then right at the bottom of your page, it says, these chapters reveal the prevailing conditions of the time and how the same nations of the millennial kingdom will pay homage to the Jews. Isaiah 19, 23 to 25. And that is actually in the picture on the right-hand side. So we're going to read that section in closing. That section there. So it talks, we just saw the headings all against Ethiopia and Sudan and Cush and Syria and Egypt and all these places. And then a very, very interesting chapter is 19, which kind of tells us a different story. And it says this, a highway from Egypt through Israel to Assyria or Iraq. Isaiah 19, 23, 25. It says this, in that day there will be a highway from Egypt to Assyria, and Assyria will come into Egypt, and Egypt into Assyria. And the Egyptians will worship with the Assyrians. In that day, Israel will be the third with Egypt and Assyria, a blessing in the midst of the earth, whom the Lord of the hosts have blessed, saying, blessed be Egypt, my people, and Assyria, the work of your hands, and Israel, my inheritance. Isn't that interesting? It's actually a beautiful chapter. I always get excited when I see that, because today we know the turmoil and conflict in the Middle East. Egypt has always been at war, well, from the time of Joseph, actually, right through the Six-Day War, all those wars. Egypt has always been against Israel. Assyria, the section of Iraq and Syria, still to this day, still hate Israel and vile enemies of them. Even right now, Assyria wants to still annihilate them as we speak. And it's interesting that these countries are so at war with Israel now, but that's not going to always be like that. There will be a time in the future, in the millennial kingdom, where Assyria, that northern section, that whole section there, and Egypt will actually align itself with Israel. Not only align themselves with her, but worship with her. They're going to worship Yahweh, the God of Israel. And then with that, they're going to have, they thought, oh, that's not even good enough. Let's do something better. Let's get this like super highway all the way from Egypt. And we're going to build this super highway all the way through to the ends of Syria, which is amazing. So even this thing, it could even change. But basically that green line or the black line is that super highway. So from Egypt, and that's the Nile River, the end of the Nile River there, it will go through Israel, which is that middle section, and go right across into Syria. And this one actually says that it will probably end down at modern-day Baghdad, Babylon. It could even go right up north to the northern part of Israel, Syria. But anyway, to see that would happen from Egypt, there will be the superhighway again right through all of these nations, where they can all come between each other. The Egyptians will mix with the Syrians, and they will all merge in Jerusalem, in Israel, which is like just totally blows my mind. So we look at them now and we kind of point fingers at them, but God's got a plan. He's going to judge them. They're going to be judged. When Jesus comes back, all those nations are going to be judged. I still believe that Armageddon, the 90% of those armies will be Muslim armies. If you just look at geographically, the countries surrounding Israel, basically Muslim countries. So God wouldn't want to go to China, Australia, or Canada. Not God, I mean the Antichrist, sorry. The Antichrist wouldn't want to go to Canada and South Africa to gather armies. He's got all the armies right there. And he's just going to gather them together at Armageddon. All right. So I believe still the bulk of those armies will probably be Middle Eastern anyway. And God will judge him. Egypt, Assyria, all those countries will be judged. But the good news is, at the end of the day, they're going to worship alongside Israel. So even if now we're reading these books of Isaiah, 700 BC, 700 years before Jesus Christ, the plan for Assyria and Egypt is still going to happen way down the line, even into the millennial kingdom, which is amazing. So even we're reading about them conquering Israel, we know that they're still doing it today. They're going to be judged, but God's not going to end it there. He's going to make them as one beautiful. And the interesting thing, it says there that they're going to be a blessing in the midst of the earth. Do you think that Egypt and Assyria, the countries that are against Israel, is actually going to be a blessing to the world? It's just like, but that's going to happen, and I can't wait for that day. That always blows my mind. Okay. Any questions regarding the lesson? Any questions regarding anything? That's a big one, I know. Thank goodness. All right. Thank you, guys. God bless you. I hope you're informed, inspired by the message. I always encourage you to go back and kind of read the chapters I understand that the bulk that we've done today is a lot of chapters, but even if you just go through one or two of them, because that's good. There's no use learning about Isaiah, not actually reading Isaiah. So when we do the small chapters, it'll be good to go through the week and learn and read those chapters. For these ones, what you can do is just read one or two of them, and then just look at what the headings of the rest of them are. All right, can we do that? At least then by next week, we're ready to go to the next chapters. All right, thank you guys. God bless you.